What if I told you that Ferrari might have finally found the key to unleashing the SF25's full potential? After weeks mired in controversy, sanctions, and a sea of doubt, the Scuderia arrives at Suzuka. And what's happening there has everyone in the paddock looking askance. Because yes, McLaren may still be the benchmark, but what Leclerc and Hamilton are showing in Japan suggests that something has changed in Maranello, and for the better. Stay until the end because we're going to break down how Ferrari has transformed its car in just a few days, why this new suspension could be a turning point, and most importantly, whether this puts them back in contention for the championship. Let me know in the comments. Do you think Ferrari has found the key, or is it just another mirage? Ferrari arrived in Japan carrying the weight of a frankly disastrous start to the season on its shoulders. What happened in the first 2 races of the year, especially in China, was not only a sporting blow, but a reputational disaster for a team that had already promised a different 2025. In Shanghai, both cars were disqualified after the race. Charles Leclerc for not meeting the minimum car weight, a basic infraction, and Lewis Hamilton for excessive wear on the floorboards, which revealed serious problems with the car's height management and setup adjustments. These errors weren't marginal or the result of bad luck. They were basic flaws, the kind that top teams can't afford if they want to compete for the title. And the most worrying thing is that they weren't isolated. They were accompanied by a general feeling of technical disorientation, of a car that seemed promising in simulations but then, on the track, failed to reproduce those performances. The SF25 was fast on 1 lap in optimal conditions, yes, but its operating window was so narrow that any deviation, whether due to track temperature, asphalt type, or fuel load, made it completely unpredictable. What happened in Japan, however, lit a spark of hope. From the first laps of FP1 at Suzuka, something was different. The confidence with which Hamilton and Leclerc attacked the first sector, their stability in quick changes of direction, and above all, the improved consistency lap after lap, painted a radically different picture. Hamilton cracked the top 5 in both sessions, and Leclerc even came close to the top 3 in the first practice session. It wasn't just the times, it was how the car felt. More balanced, more predictable, more manageable. The first sector at Suzuka was key to revealing this change. It's a fast, technical, and very aerodynamically demanding area. And there, the SF25 shone. The new, grippier, smoother asphalt allowed the drivers to attack with more confidence. This is something Ferrari hadn't achieved in Australia or China, where the car seemed to demand too much without giving anything in return. What's most interesting is that this improvement wasn't the result of a major aerodynamic evolution, nor of a revolutionary part. It was the result of a better understanding of how to set up the car in real time during the weekend. And that, for Ferrari, is a first. In Hamilton's own words, the progress between FP1 and FP2 was significant. They went from an unbalanced and difficult-to-handle car to one that allowed him to push with confidence. This kind of internal progress within a single day speaks to a team that is finally beginning to understand its machine. And that's perhaps the best news of all for Maranello. Because if you understand your car, you can develop it, you can adapt it, and you can race. Suzuka could be remembered as the turning point in Ferrari's 2025 season. Not for having won a race, not even for having finished on the podium, but for having regained something much more valuable: control. Control over his car, over his technical decisions, and over the direction of a season that seemed to be slipping away. Because sometimes true rebirth doesn't come with a victory, but with a Friday when, finally, everything starts to make sense. Behind every transformation in Formula One is a story of engineering, data, and millimeter-precise decisions. And Ferrari's case at Japan 2025 is no exception. To understand why the SF25 has taken such a visible step forward, we must go beyond mere on-track performance and analyze what has happened behind the scenes, specifically in the area that has become the car's Achilles heel, the suspension. Since the start of the season, the Scuderia has faced a complex and extremely restrictive technical dilemma. The SF25 has clearly struggled to operate within an optimal performance window. The reason? A problematic interaction between the suspension system and the car's aerodynamics. In other words, the car not only had to deal with cornering, braking, and typical downforces, but also with a suspension setup that simply didn't allow it to take advantage of its design. The analysis following the Chinese Grand Prix revealed the magnitude of the problem. Lowering the car to gain aerodynamic efficiency destroyed the floorboards and risked disqualification, as happened to Hamilton. But raising them to protect that area lost downforce, compromised rear traction, and consequently sacrificed performance. A vicious cycle Ferrari couldn't escape without compromising something fundamental. The key to the breakthrough in Japan wasn't redesigning the car. There were no revolutionary new parts or magic solutions. What was needed was something far more valuable: understanding. In the Maranello simulator, the engineers worked with at least 20 different configurations. From this painstaking work, they identified a clear pattern. The car's mechanical response was unbalanced between the front and rear axles. This imbalance not only affected corner entry but also overall stability, and on circuits like Suzuka, that's lethal. Thus, the idea of reconfiguring the suspension was born. Not as a structural update that would have required weeks of manufacturing and validation, but as a different combination of settings between the front and rear. What Ferrari implemented in Japan was a completely new kind of balance map, optimized for the type of load, the aerodynamic profile, and the track's asphalt. And the most interesting thing is that, according to internal simulator data, this new setup has room for adaptability, which could make it viable on other circuits on the calendar. But there's one detail that can't be overlooked. Lewis Hamilton also received a timely update to his steering wheel software, allowing him to more precisely manage the balance and height modes. This improvement, not yet available to Leclerc, suggests that Ferrari is experimenting with driver-specific setups to accelerate the car's development. A risky move, but a logical one considering Hamilton's experience and ability to extract technical information in real time. This suspension change isn't just a technical improvement. It's a statement of intent. Ferrari isn't expecting miracles in the form of major aerodynamic developments. They're banking on adaptive, flexible engineering that allows them to react within the same weekend. That's what the champion teams have done in recent years. Not just build fast cars, but understandable cars. In a season where every tenth of a second counts and every mistake is paid for with points, this new suspension could be the turning point that changes not only the trajectory of the SF25, but Ferrari's entire narrative in 2025. Because when a team like this begins to understand its car in depth, what comes next is often dangerous for the rest of the field. Ferrari's strong performance at Suzuka has reactivated a question that seemed forgotten in Maranello. Can this team once again be a real title contender in 2025? The answer isn't simple, and to address it, you have to look at much more than lap times. Because a solid performance on a circuit, even one as technical and demanding as Suzuka, guarantees nothing if it can't be replicated in different scenarios. Modern Formula One is all about consistency. It's not just about shining in a couple of races, but about being competitive across a wide range of circuits, conditions, and race formats. And that's where Ferrari still has a long way to go. What we saw in Japan is encouraging but not definitive. The big question is whether this new understanding of the SF25, this improved suspension setup, and this renewed car balance can be maintained when the variables change. When the track is less technical, when the asphalt is not as grippy, or when tire management becomes the determining factor. Furthermore, it's important to remember that what happened in Japan occurred in a very specific context. McLaren remains the strongest car at the moment in terms of race pace management, and Mercedes is showing a progressive evolution that could explode at any moment. Red Bull, despite its internal turbulence and the obvious difficulty its drivers are having adapting to the RB21, cannot ever be ruled out with Verstappen at the wheel. In this environment, any resurgence must be sustained week after week to have a real impact on the championship standings. Ferrari knows this. That's why it didn't want to rush the implementation of the new flat floor, which was originally planned for later in the season. The team has opted to be methodical, collecting real-world data on the track to validate what it learned in the simulator. If this approach continues, that is, if development is accompanied by analysis, understanding, and rapid response capacity, then yes, we could be facing a turning point in the 2025 season. The other major variable is the dynamic between drivers. Hamilton, with more experience, has received priority adjustments that have allowed him to better exploit the car at Suzuka. Leclerc, although competitive, is still a step behind in terms of access to certain upgrades. If Ferrari manages to balance the performance of both without generating internal tensions, it will be able to have two cars constantly in contention, which is essential for aspiring to the Constructors' Championships and maintaining its chances in the Drivers' Championship. But beyond projections, what's at stake for Ferrari right now is something even deeper than points or trophies. It's the validation of its technical project. For years, the Scuderia has been accused of inconsistencies, of not knowing how to react in a timely manner, of failing at the basics. The good result in Japan not only demonstrates that they have the technical means to compete, but that, for the first time in a long time, they are also making the right decisions at the right time. Is this improvement sustainable? Only time and future races will tell. But what is clear is that if Ferrari manages to maintain this learning curve and consolidate its new approach, it can once again pose a real threat. Because it's not about having a good weekend, it's about having fired up a machine that seemed dormant. And if that machine continues to function, then yes, McLaren, Mercedes, and Red Bull have reason to worry. The championship suddenly no longer seems as close as it did just a few weeks ago. Today we saw how Ferrari, after a start to the season marked by glaring errors and overwhelming media pressure, has begun to show signs of life on a stage as demanding as Suzuka. But beyond the specific results, what has really changed is the team's internal narrative. It's no longer about an untamed car or a disoriented technical group. What we saw in Japan was a team that is finally beginning to understand its work tool and use it intelligently. We review how the disaster in China became, in just 2 weeks, an opportunity to reorganize, calmly analyze the mistakes, and execute a clear plan. The change in suspension settings wasn't just a technical fix. It was a demonstration of organizational maturity, the kind of capability that separates the big teams from the winning ones. We also saw how Lewis Hamilton, increasingly comfortable in his new environment, is becoming not only an asset as a driver but also a key source of technical development for the SF25. But the big question, the one that remains after the Japanese Grand Prix, is whether this was a one-off flash in the pan or the beginning of a true renaissance. Because championships aren't won on a Friday or in a single practice session. They are built on consistency, adaptation, and, above all, technical proficiency that delivers at the highest level race after race. Ferrari has taken a step in that direction, but the challenge will be to sustain it when circuits with less grip, variable temperatures, and completely different demands arrive. What's undeniable is that the paddock attitude toward Ferrari has changed. They're no longer seen as just a sleeping giant, but as a potential threat if these kinds of weekends become the norm. And that, in a season as open as the 2025 season, can make all the difference. Because when a team with Ferrari's legacy begins to understand its car, refine its decisions, and maximize the talent of its drivers, then the entire championship is reshaped. If this analysis helped you better understand what's at stake for Ferrari, don't forget to leave your opinion below. Do you think the SF25 is finally on the right track? Or will we see inconsistencies again in Bahrain? And if you're interested in learning more about that crucial floor update coming at the next race, subscribe and hit the bell. Because in our next video we'll break down how Ferrari plans to attack one of the most aerodynamically demanding circuits, and why this evolution could be the final step to cementing themselves as real title contenders.